How does one end up as an otaku? It's not a lifestyle you'd choose for the hell of it. Granted, I have seen people enter the world of hardcore fandom from a place of being confident and relatively socially capable, but to openly take interest in something which society by and large disapproves of requires either an intense kinship with this media which society isn't otherwise providing, and or a level of self-assuredness which can deflect social criticism regardless. Most of us go down this road because we feel disconnected from or outright rejected by the culture surrounding us, and are only capable of finding human connection through art, either because of our relationship to the feelings of the creators themselves, or to others who resonate with it for reasons similar to ours. It's hardly a surprise then that the people who tend to get most deeply ingrained into this world are those most on the fringe of social acceptance. Being forced to live inside of circumstances which you don't innately understand or find easy to participate in lends its own kind of strength though. If you have to work even harder to learn how to fit into society, then you'll need to break down and analyze how society functions in the first place and approach it strategically. Finding a way to participate in a society which doesn't seem to have been built with you in mind is never easy, but you can't prove that a success paradigm doesn't exist for yourself. You can keep searching for it until you either find the solution or die trying, but you can never prove that it didn't exist. Enter the otaku hero, the one who is able to locate an endless wellspring of hope inside of themselves because they've started from ground zero, and there is nowhere for them to go but up. Be they on a search to find a place for themselves or to save the world, it is the extreme level of learning which they've had to do in order to even reach a baseline functionality within society that's taught them to never ever give up. Even if they don't know how to realize it yet, they can imagine a happy ending, because they've studied the countless theoretical formulas to achieving it proposed by the arts and sciences. And since they've already been to the bottom, they have nothing to fear, as that place has been their home. It isn't having the floor pulled out from under them which begins their journey. They rise to the occasion not from having something taken from them, but because they have already spent their entire lives rising to occasions, and see no reason to stop at any place other than where they can be totally satisfied leading the life which they most desire. It is because of the otaku's constant hunger to evolve, grow, and exceed their limitations that they inevitably will learn to work with and accept others, as they will see how it allows them to reach even greater heights. It is because they had to learn so much to get to the ground floor that they will imagine what exists above the sky. And even if they can't figure out how to get there, they are going to shout about its existence until someone listens, while gathering around them anyone who can work out the math to prove it. Oftentimes, otaku heroes are presented in pairs, which I will refer to as the mad scientist and the living computer. The mad scientist is usually loud, charismatic, optimistic, and imaginative, but has bigger ideas than what he can actually realize on his own. The living computer is more cynical, only believing in what they have found proof for, and is therefore lacking in imagination by comparison. But when presented with a task which the mad scientist is confident they can solve, they will become obsessed with realizing it. In some stories, these characters will be radically stratified from each other, but No Game No Life takes a more nuanced approach. It might be fair to say that Sora is 55% mad scientist, while Shiro is 45% living computer, and it could be that bridging the gap this far is simply the result of their living together. Sora is more than capable of running advanced on-the-fly calculations and cataloging an extreme level of worldly knowledge, but he's just a degree worse at it than Shiro is, who is about as close to a literal living computer as any character I've ever seen in anime. Meanwhile, Shiro doesn't have her brother's charisma or imagination, but she believes in them with absolute trust, and has bought into his optimistic ethos wholesale, though both of them are only capable of having hope as long as the other is with them, because either knows that their own perspective is incomplete. Accompanying them is the normie, whom we shall henceforth refer to as the Steph, since the series goes out of its way to colorfully name this trope. What defines the Steph is simply their fear of the unknown and clinging to social norms for comfort. Normalcy, after all, is not a solid state, but a fluid definition applied to whatever happens to be the current bell curve of personal attitudes within a society. For many, normalcy is more of a performative act than even a natural state, and is defined more by their rejection of what they consider abnormal or dangerous than by anything which they actually do to be normal. Steph is not a Steph because of her level of intelligence or social standing. She's a literal princess who graduated at the top of her class, class, both extraordinary circumstances. Her stiffness is purely the result of her non-lateral interpretation of morality and lack of critical thinking skills. Also joining the team is the sociopath, Gibril. This is a character who thinks like the otaku hero, except that they have concluded that anyone less intelligent or powerful than them in whatever way they value is totally worthless. Usually this character would be a villain in a series like this, and there are no shortage of scenes reminding us that Gibril is an abject piece of shit. Remorseless over the countless murders she's committed, relentlessly prejudiced against other races, and motivated purely by self-interest. However, by putting her in a position where she has to acquiesce to the demands of the otaku heroes, the series strips her of any danger and leaves her merely as a backup calculator and power generator for the main characters. Positioning Steph and Gibril next to our protagonists serves a clear purpose, to represent the extremes which nullify progress. Because Gibril has such a linear view of intelligence as something which you can just collect from others and then dispose of them, she doesn't know the value of working as a team to reach further conclusions than what you can on your own. And because Steph is so dedicated to social decency, she doesn't understand how the rules governing reality itself stretch beyond the rules of her society. The otaku hero has to stand in between these extremes. They are not so arrogant as to believe that they can do it alone, because they understand that more allies grant them more power. But they also know that trying to approach the acquisition of allies on their own terms will leaden them in an endless marsh of bureaucratic niceties as they try to lead people by the nose to understanding their own best interests beyond the confines of short-term comfort. To be in this mindset, the hero must be someone who's managed to have, on the one hand, been rejected by society enough to have their doubts about the worth of its mechanics, while not being so downtrodden as to lose faith in human goodness altogether. At the start of the series, our protagonists are in the latter position, but the all-important switch which is flipped for them to rise to the occasion happens when they pass into a universe which has one critical rule that doesn't exist in ours. It is impossible to kill. In order to appreciate the message of No Game No Life, we must begin from the inalienable reality that everything happens for a reason. That is to say that every occurrence is the natural consequence of everything which has come before. Provided you have enough skills in deductive reasoning and enough knowledge about how the world operates, you should be able to interpret why anything has come to pass, as well as to predict everything which is going to happen. Granted, the amount of variables transpiring in our moment-to-moment existence are vastly beyond any one person's ability to calculate. But this is anime, where you can establish a character immediately as knowing every possibility within a game that has more possibilities than there are stars in the universe. Sora and Shiro could easily fix our entire world if the world had to follow their commands. But in our world, people do not always act out of their own self-interest, nor do they hardly ever know what would be best for them. And since there are so many people willing to act irrationally in our world, an extreme expertise in rationale is hardly even a consolation. You will not be rewarded here for knowing the optimal solutions to problems. The moment that Sora and Shiro entered a world in which rationale was the golden rule, they had already completely won the game. As long as no one is capable of killing them, there is no reason for them to be afraid of anything. The fact that this world hasn't already been solved before they got there is evidence that no one in this world is thinking rationally enough to solve it, meaning that everyone here is demonstrably worse at the game than they are. All there is for them to do is to play the game through to its natural conclusion, which they both know immediately and is self-evident in the fact that they got here by conquering the god of this world from the outset. As Elon Musk would say, there is almost no chance whatsoever that our universe is not a simulation. To think so would just be insanely arrogant. Assuming this, why is the simulation being run? We have no way of even conceiving of the reason, but we do know that continuing to evolve has fundamentally changed our relationship with the universe surrounding us, and that if there is any way to escape the inevitable end of this universe, then the answer lies in evolving our understanding of it as rapidly as possible. possible, and we can best do that by working together. We learned from an early point in the series that the rules of Disboard used to be no different from the rules of our own reality. There may be many more races with many more abilities, but they used these to endlessly war with one another while scrambling to be the ultimate race in control of the planet's future. That is, until it was proven to the god running the simulation that the most important tool of evolution was togetherness, and that as long as the rules failed to encourage this, we would never be able to achieve it. Ergo, Tet decided to change the world to find a system which eventually would encourage everyone to work together, once someone had come along who could solve the world's puzzle. Of course, it's safe to assume that existence is just turtles all the way down. Tet is running this simulation so that he too can escape his own limitations and reach outside of the simulation which he himself is trapped in to confront the gods above him. And likewise, should we ever penetrate the fourth dimension, we would likely just be joining a new strata of life forms on a mission to break into the fifth one. We have been able to theorize our way up to imagining 10 of these bad boys, but the truth is way the hell out of our lifetimes to grasp. Every game which is played over the course of the series is meant to teach us something about how the world works, as well as how we can move forward working together. The first game is a version of chess in which the pieces have a will of their own. In a case like this, knowing all of the possibilities is less important than simply knowing people, which is why Sora has to command the troops instead of Shiro. The game is a microcosm of the series' purpose on the whole, showing how tactics which require sacrifices to be made will ultimately convolute the motivations of the soldiers. But emotions are also completely logical and mappable, just much more difficult to find solutions for. Thankfully, as promised by the god of this world, all conflicts are resolved by simple games. If each of these pieces were actually a fully realized human being, then it would be difficult for Sora to find unique ways to inspire each of them specifically. But since they are more like template representations of the most cliched ideas of what their pieces literally represent, he can appeal to them on extremely broad terms by satisfying their most basic needs. If everyone's motivations were this simple, then he could have just used the same tactics to end all war in the same amount of time. But again, this is just a simple game. The battles with Steph and Gibril in episodes 5 and 6 are basically just to prove the points I already made about them. How critical thinking is limited by failing to understand the underlying systems governing reality, and how arrogance and a lack of respect for supposedly unimportant perspectives will limit your ability to learn everything that there is to learn. The battle with the Beastmen, then, is simply to expand the complexity of the metagame moving forward, starting with the most, I promised myself I wouldn't use the word autistic in this video, race of people on Disboard. Look, the story of No Game No Life isn't special or anything. There's about 1 million anime dealing with these themes, and surely plenty of other media which I don't know because all I do is watch anime, and that's kind of the whole reason for this show to be the way that it is. If you're a young person who thinks too much and gets rejected by society in Japan, this is the media you're going to turn to. Ever since Gundam gave us the word new type, we were destined to this fate. No Game No Life is designed from the ground up to be by otaku for otaku. Did you know that the light novels were written by a Brazilian guy who grew up in Japan? I would be shocked if that didn't contribute to the ultra-wide-angle lens which his work takes towards this paradigm, just as my being an American contributes a lot to how I analyze it. Why are Sora and Shiro positioned as brother and sister, even though they aren't blood-related, and the show obviously considers them to be in love with each other? Because the concept of a brother-sister relationship is a shorthand for the closest conceivable understanding which two people can have, even if it's rare that any actual brother and sister are as close as anime wishes they would be. Given that otaku are mostly people who have had difficulty connecting with others, they fantasize about having someone who perfectly understands them having been there all along to help them through. I'm not going to be shy about this. My fiance and I have a relationship just like Sora and Shiro's, and we think of ourselves as siblings or fantasize about if we could have been them almost constantly. Why is there so much fan service? Because otaku are mostly sexually repressed as a result of their social malignation, and may even have experienced a disconnect from society specifically on the basis of their confusion over their own sexuality, and had to explore this facet of themselves via erotic media. And since the internet is vast and there is no tour guide for sexuality because society won't talk about it, most of us have taken a deep dive into the world of illustrated fetish porn and become totally desensitized and normalized to it. Literally, it's just not a big fucking deal. No Game No Life even makes fun of this fact with a scene wherein Sora finds a way to remove the crotches and nipples from all of the girls, thus making them perfectly acceptable for television in spite of the fact that what's being shown is absolutely no less lewd than if they still had those parts, as a way of pointing out how completely arbitrary the lines which we draw on acceptable sexuality in modern society truly are. It's hilarious and golden. Why are there so many anime references? They're all calling cards, reassurance of camaraderie between the show and the viewer. You could call them something like flashing an ID, a notification that you can feel safe in these hands because they've seen the same things you've seen and you can understand one another. Why do the war beasts fashion their media after the trashiest, most shallow and vapid elements of otaku culture? Let's be fair and just say it's because they're more engineers than philosophers. Hey, everyone has something they're good at, or at least a unique set of priorities. Plenty of people who can't hold a conversation to save their lives can nonetheless code an entire video game, or build a spaceship, or draw a city from memory. And that just means they have a different kind of intelligence. In the case of the Beastmen, it's their physicality which is most impressive. After all, the logic of their game is couched entirely in high-speed, on-the-fly ballistics calculations. Interpreting the trajectories of two round objects after colliding in the span of a split second would be impressive enough, but this game is accelerated far beyond anything reasonably human. It even takes 4 humans just to take out one warbeast in this game. Sora and Shiro may be tactical geniuses, but neither could have taken Izuna alone, nor even without the rest of their squad, simply because they are not physically capable enough. The warbeasts only made for a good first target because their critical thinking skills are so much rougher than their instincts, and as soon as this was apparent, it was all Sora and Shiro needed to plan around them. But more importantly, they are the best possible allies to gather first for covering the biggest weakness of the home team, namely being a bunch of weak nerds. All themes and tactics aside, there is so much to enjoy about No Game No Life, even on the surface. Phenomenal character designs drawn in consistently attractive detail by Madhouse on the backdrop of some of the most uniquely opulent digital backgrounds of the decade. Director Atsuko Ishizuka's penchant for expressive framing and unique color aesthetics reflecting the emotional context of each scene. Gripping sci-fi plot twists executed with appropriately badass and over-the-top visual spectacle. And best of all, a consistently brisk and light-stepping pace which keeps it easy to watch and rewatch. The movie, however, I find unfortunate in that it subverts a lot of the show's appeal, while getting too heavy-handed trying to re-explain its core messages, almost as if the author was frustrated that perhaps people weren't getting the point enough and tried to make it as clear and direct as possible. The only problem is that the show's setting and character designs were built around the tone of the core narrative, and watching a serious war story full of emotional melodrama unfolding with these elements came off, well, chunibyo as fuck. I appreciated the establishment of Anonymous, given that the tactic of hiding wouldn't be necessary in a world where death isn't a concern for your team, but so little was done with this tactically that it felt woefully underutilized, as did this unique opportunity to potentially explore more of the world than what we had seen, as opposed to nothing but previously established characters or XPs for them. The best I can really say about this is that I enjoyed the excuse to see Sora and Shiro actually get married, and that at least it wasn't off-message, but it definitely made me appreciate just how important the tone and pacing of the series was to my enjoyment of it. If I have any major complaints about the series as a whole, though, it has to be the sound design. I can't say I went into the show with a ton of enthusiasm when it opened on not only the kind of random, flashy, no-stakes action scene between characters we have no context to care about that I always hate, but one with generic stock sound effects blasting by. The show's music is fine, and the OP is absolute god tier, but I wish my brain wasn't poisoned by having heard every stock sound effect too many times not to notice them. Nonetheless, I really enjoyed this show rewatching it. Never mind that so much of its philosophy was stuff I had just gotten done writing about in this pamphlet book I haven't had time to release outside of my Patreon yet, but I just love Sora and Shiro to death. I relate to their constant teeter-tottering between hope and total disdain for humanity, and the perverse airing of their frustrations on the Stephs of the land, which are enough to balance the scales for them in a world which may as well be their plaything. Steph is a good Steph, Jibril is an absolute joy because the show lets her be such a goddamn monster, and the supporting cast shows plenty of potential to entertain. It's too bad there still isn't a second season! The otaku hero's journey, however, shall continue. No Game No Life can almost be seen as a template story within this meta-genre, one which seems to go out of its way to use the clearest archetypes of character and story to tell that narrative concisely. Next time we'll be looking at a somewhat more complex take on the journey in the form of Steins Gate. Anyways, it's time for me to enter the Odin sleep. Expect some vloggy shit while I'm out of town for the next few days, and support me on Patreon if you enjoy my meta-futurist ramblings about cheap light novels, because that'll buy me more time to finish the one I'm writing right now! Thanks again for watching, I'll see you tomorrow.